In a world where appearances can be deceiving and true leadership often goes unnoticed until it's too late, this is the story of how a humble, fearless leader was underestimated and disrespected because no one realized who he truly was. Ibrahim Traoré, a name now known around the globe for strength, revolution, and resilience. But not long ago, he was just another man walking among his people, dressed simply, speaking softly, and observing everything around him with a quiet intensity. What makes this story so compelling is not just his rise to power, but how, even after becoming the president of Burkina Faso, he maintained a persona so grounded that many couldn't even tell he was a head of state. And in one particular incident, that humility led to an encounter that shocked everyone in the room, everyone except Traoré himself. Let's rewind for a moment. Who is Ibrahim Traoré? Born in 1988, Traoré is not your typical president. He's a military officer, a patriot, and a man of the people. Before taking office, he served in the Burkina Faso armed forces, rising through the ranks with discipline, intelligence, and a relentless sense of duty. In 2022, amidst political instability and rising threats from insurgent groups, Traoré led a popular coup that ousted the interim president at the time. He wasn't chasing power, he was chasing change. And yet, after assuming office as the world's youngest serving head of state, he didn't drape himself in luxury or demand respect through title alone. No, he stayed low profile, often showing up in plain military attire, walking among soldiers and civilians alike. That choice, that humility, is what makes this next part so unforgettable. At a diplomatic reception, attended by high-ranking officials, foreign dignitaries, and security personnel, Traoré entered without a formal escort. No grand announcement, no flashy entrance, just him, in a standard military uniform. A group of foreign officials standing nearby didn't recognize him. They continued their conversations, exchanging pleasantries and sizing up others in the room. When Traoré walked past, one of them, unaware of who he was, gave him a dismissive glance, clearly unimpressed. Another, assuming he was just a bodyguard or junior officer, reportedly asked him to step aside so they could take pictures of what they thought was the important delegation. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré simply nodded and stepped aside, calm, unbothered, even amused. He wasn't there to prove a point. His presence was enough. It wasn't until a few moments later that an aide approached the foreign guests, whispering urgently in their ears. Their expressions changed instantly, from arrogant and casual to stunned and pale. The man they had just dismissed as an unimportant nobody was the president of Burkina Faso. You could almost hear the silence ripple across the room. Embarrassed, the officials quickly turned back, attempting to greet him with the politeness they had withheld just minutes earlier. But Traoré didn't react with anger or pride. He smiled lightly, accepted their greetings, and moved on. That's the kind of leader Ibrahim Traoré is. He doesn't command respect through power plays. He earns it through action, through presence, through knowing exactly who he is, even if others don't. This incident, while seemingly minor, speaks volumes about how we judge people based on appearance, clothing, or social cues. And it also reveals something profound. True leadership doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to wear a crown. In a time when many leaders are distant from their people, cocooned in luxury and protected by layers of formality, Traoré is different. He walks the streets. He listens. He leads from the front. He doesn't need validation from titles or foreign approval. His authority comes from the people who believe in his mission. Since coming to power, he has taken bold steps to reclaim national dignity, expel foreign forces he believed were no longer serving Burkina Faso's interests, and push for real sovereignty. Whether or not you agree with his methods, one thing is certain. Ibrahim Traoré represents a new kind of African leadership, rooted in patriotism, youth, and authenticity. So the next time you see someone standing silently in the background, dressed plainly, not drawing attention to themselves, remember this story. Because you never know. You might be looking at a president, a leader, a revolutionary. And just like those officials who disrespected Ibrahim Traoré, you might realize, too late, just who you were talking to. But that wasn't the only time Ibrahim Traoré stunned people with his humility and unexpected presence. Another moment that captured international attention happened just months after he became president. Burkina Faso was facing intensified threats from extremist insurgents. Entire regions were under siege, with civilians and soldiers alike caught in the crossfire. Many leaders would have addressed this from behind fortified walls, through statements, press conferences, and military orders from afar. But not Traoré. In a move that surprised even his top commanders, he decided to travel, without warning, to one of the most dangerous zones in the country. No huge security convoy, no cameras, no fanfare. Just him and a few trusted guards. When he arrived at the front line, soldiers were stunned. At first, many didn't recognize him. Dressed in dusty fatigues, his boots covered in red soil, he looked just like any other comrade. One young soldier, reportedly exhausted and bruised, stood up and said, "Who's this guy?" And then, silence. Someone whispered, "That's the president." You could feel the morale shift instantly. Soldiers who were moments ago drained and broken suddenly stood taller. The man at the top had come, not to inspect them from a distance, but to stand with them, to listen, to fight beside them if necessary. He didn't bring speeches. He brought supplies, reinforcements, medical aid, and perhaps most important of all, he brought belief. He sat on the ground with them, ate the same rations, slept in the same conditions, and then as quickly as he had arrived, he left, telling them only one thing: "The future of our country lies with you. I believe in you." That moment became legendary in Burkina Faso, because it wasn't just about war, it was about leadership, about a man who didn't ask others to risk their lives without being willing to do it himself. It sent a message across the nation and beyond. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a figurehead. He was a servant of the people, a soldier of the soil. His visit to the front line didn't just boost morale, it changed the course of that conflict. Soldiers began fighting with renewed energy. Communities that had nearly given up hope rallied. Again, that's the kind of impact one man's presence can have when it's authentic, when it's grounded in courage, not ceremony. And once again, Traoré reminded the world, leadership isn't about titles, it's about action. So while some still try to judge him by his youth, his quiet nature, or his lack of traditional political polish, those who've seen him in action know better. Ibrahim Traoré is a symbol of change, a face of African resilience, and a reminder that real power lies not in being feared, but in being respected. And he's earning that respect one bold step at a time. One of the most defining moments of Ibrahim Traoré's presidency wasn't on the battlefield or in the streets. It was behind closed doors, in a diplomatic meeting that shook the traditional power dynamics between Africa and the West. After taking office, Traoré quickly became known for his unapologetic stance on reclaiming Burkina Faso's independence, not just from insurgents, but from foreign influence. He believed that for too long, African nations had been treated like pawns in a global game, forced to choose between powerful blocs that didn't always have their best interests at heart. So when a group of Western diplomats arrived in Ouagadougou to discuss the future of Burkina Faso's security partnerships, they expected the usual diplomatic dance, polite words, cautious commitments, and a quiet nod to international demands. But that's not what they got. Inside the presidential hall, with the Burkinabe flag standing tall behind him, Traoré looked the diplomats straight in the eye and said something no one expected. Burkina Faso will not be a colony, not today, not ever again. The room went silent. One diplomat attempted to remind him of the financial aid and support his country had received in the past. But Traoré didn't flinch. Calmly but firmly, he replied, "Help. that comes with strings is not help, it's a leash. He went on to explain that true sovereignty means being able to choose one's partners, defend one's land, and shape one's destiny without coercion or interference. He expressed his dissatisfaction with how foreign military forces had operated in the Sahel region for years, often with little improvement in the security situation. And then, he did something bold. He gave a deadline for all foreign troops and operatives that were not aligned with Burkina Faso's new national strategy to leave the country. Some thought it was political suicide. Others feared retaliation. But Traore stood firm, stating, "We are ready to stand alone, because standing alone for your freedom is better than kneeling with company." What followed was nothing short of historic. Several foreign military installations began pulling out. Burkina Faso, along with a few neighboring nations, started forming their own regional defense alliances, designed by Africans for Africans. This wasn't just a policy shift, it was a psychological shift. For decades, African leaders were often seen as hesitant to challenge the global order. But here was a 30-something-year-old president saying no, not with anger, but with dignity. And the people of Burkina Faso rallied behind him. Crowds filled the streets waving flags and chanting his name. Not because he promised miracles, but because he promised self-respect. Traore wasn't just changing policies, he was changing the narrative. He showed the world that African leadership doesn't have to be submissive. It can be proud, it can be independent, and most importantly, it can say no when yes is no longer acceptable. This moment will go down in history, not just for Burkina Faso, but for every nation that ever felt too small to stand up. Because thanks to leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, the world is beginning to learn. Never underestimate a people determined to reclaim their destiny. In the rural village of Dori, far from the capital and far from any cameras or media, there lived a group of displaced families, victims of terrorist attacks that had ravaged their communities. These were people who had lost everything, their homes, their farms, even family members. They were living in makeshift tents, surviving on the bare minimum, with little hope that anyone in power even remembered them. Then one morning, without notice, a convoy of dusty vehicles rolled into the village. No big flags, no loud announcements, just a small team of men stepping out. One of them, wearing a simple military shirt and a beret, looked around, walked up to the village elder, and introduced himself quietly. "I'm Ibrahim Traoré," he said. The elder looked confused. "Your name?" "It's the same as the president's," he replied, not realizing who was standing in front of him. Traoré smiled and said, "Yes, it is." Only when a soldier respectfully saluted him did the villagers realize who he really was. Gasps spread through the camp. Children peered from behind tents. Some of the women wept. Not because a president had come to visit, but because he had come without announcement or pride, and with compassion in his eyes. He didn't bring a speech. He brought trucks of food, medical supplies, and warm clothing. But even more importantly, he sat with the people, not on a platform, but on the ground. He listened to their stories. He asked what they needed. He didn't talk at them. He talked with them. At one point, a grieving mother approached him with a photograph of her son, killed by militants only weeks before. With trembling hands, she held it out and said, "I hope you never forget him." Traoré took the photo and stared at it in silence. Then gently, he folded it and placed it in his breast pocket. "I will carry him with me," he said. "Not just in my jacket, but in every decision I make from this day." The villagers were stunned. They had never seen a leader like this, one who didn't just promise justice, but felt their pain. Before he left, Traoré gathered the community and said, "You are not forgotten. As long as I breathe, your suffering will be my mission." That visit never made international headlines. No press releases were sent out. But the story spread like wildfire across Burkina Faso, because it meant something deeper than any policy. It meant the president didn't just rule, He belonged to the people. And in a world where so many leaders rule from behind glass walls, here was one who sat in the dust under the sun, side by side with his people. That's not just leadership, that's humanity.